Hey guys, Josh back with another video, and today we're going to be doing some play versus a trainer, and then in between hands we're going to be looking at the spot a bit deeper. Um, so the specific spot we're studying today is blind v blind single race pot on 5-span low boards, and the specific line we're going to be looking at is the check down line. Heroes in position, and we face a bet on the river. So we were the pre-flop caller in position blind v blind, and then it checks down to the river, and we face a bet. Um, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna play two hands, and then after we play both hands, we're going to look at the two spots in Pio, uh, discuss the theory around the spot, our general value thresholds, things like that. So yeah, let's hop right into it. So here on the left, we have 9-7 deuce two-tone, and goes check check, queen of spades check check, and then on the river we face an overbet. So we should be considering what our opponent's general strategy is in the spot, and then try to make some decisions with our hand. So talking about play for both players on previous streets in these delay lines is pretty important. So here I'm thinking, okay, what is my opponent's incentive for value hands like this? So on the turn, this is sort of like a high wet board. Especially a queen's a pretty decent card for out of position. However, it's such a wet connected flush board that if you have a hand like ace queen or kings or two pair, most of those hands are just going to want to bet themselves on a board that's generally good for out of position, because if out of position checks, we're not going to be betting very often on a card that's significantly better for out of position. Yeah, especially on higher cards when your top pair doesn't need as much protection. Like, if we have queen six here, we don't have as much incentive to bet as we would, like, 10-6 on a dry 10 high board. Because then our top pair would need more protection. So I'm thinking that this, even though just a naked top pair is probably good enough to go for this size, I would imagine it's going to be quite a few two pair and flushes, because again, well, another point would be on a board this wet, if out of position has a hand like queen nine, they wouldn't be so keen on check raising because they want us to bet call a queen on the turn, which we aren't betting very often anyhow. And they unblock all of our draws. So, yeah, and the board's just so wet that if you have a hand like queen nine, you don't want to put a ton of money in on the turn. You'd rather just get like a 3/4 pot bet in and bet big on the river, on a clean river. So here I would think that having blockers to the strongest hands, namely flushes or I mean straights are possible, although again on a high turn like this, out of position should be betting most of their straight draws, I would think. Yeah, betting most of them themselves. So given all of that, I mean I don't think we really even block many straights besides like 10-8 or something that was going for a turn check raise. But that would be like 10-8 with a spade would be the combo that would be strong enough to check raise on the turn for out of position. So I just don't think we really block anything. Besides maybe like Queen 10. But I think out of position is gonna bet that hand too on the turn. Especially with the overcard to the 9. So yeah, I mean I think this hand's just a pure fold. Okay. So here on the right, 9-7 deuce rainbow, turn 8, check, check. Yeah, and turn goes check, check, and then we get a king river, which obviously is pretty decent for out of position. So I'm thinking, so on this turn would be much different, right? Because this is a much more middling, wet turn. And position probably has a little bit of a straight advantage here since we have all the 6-5 off from pre-flop. So out of position isn't going to be just, you know, pure betting all of their made hands here. They're definitely going to be mixing in some checks just because the in-position player is going to be betting much more often. So thinking about these sorts of hands that would make sense for out of position in this line, I mean, you know, certainly something like ace, king, king, queen make a ton of sense in this line. If out of position has a hand like queen 10, king 10, they could certainly bet those hands themselves. I think a lot of the hands that are going to go for the turn check raise are going to have suits in them, like, you know, king 10 off or queen 10 off with a heart could, you know, go for the check raise on the turn. So I think, you know, if we have the 10 of hearts here, that would be better, I think. The only the nice thing, the only nice thing about the 10 really here is that hands with a 10 in it for out of position would bluff more often on the turn, so then we unblock more bluffs like, you know, like queen 6 or 6-4 suited or something. But again, there are so many of those sorts of hands to choose from that interact with the straight. I think we'd want just better blockers to top pair. Having an ace, I think, is quite good for sure. Given out of position probably isn't betting turn, it's probably taking this line at a pretty high frequency with ace king. So ace is good, 10 is not great because you know, out of position is going to bet something like king 10 more than king jack on the turn, so we don't block as much top pair. This one seems close, but against a big bet, I think we just fold this one. Okay, so it's indifference. Okay, so let's take a look at both of these. So you might notice a couple things looking a bit different about my Pio setup here. First, I changed the colors just to make things more readable, a bit more high contrast. So that should help. So yellow, orange, burnt orange, and then this more red color. And then you'll see it in OBS. I basically just created a few overlays that just so the viewer could see the board more clearly, and the tree navigator up here. Hopefully these are all much more readable while watching the video. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. Okay, so in this 9-7 deuce queen, it was the flush queen on the turn. On the board here, I made the spades white, just so you could see them a bit easier. Yeah, so on the turn, out of position is going to be, with their stronger top pair, they're just going to be betting a lot themselves. So stuff that interacts with this higher end of the board. So like this Queen Jack, Queen 10, King Queen, Ace Queen stuff is just going to be betting themselves because on a board this wet, they don't want to blow up the pot necessarily. They'd rather just get a few medium-sized bets in. And then if the river's a brick, they can size up a bit. So the checking range. I apologize for the thunder you hear in the background. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's some thunder. So the value that gets the river and then overbets the river is going to be pretty condensed to like flushes and sets or something like aces that's trapping turn. As far as how flushes play on the turn, you guys might notice something like something like ace 6, ace 5, ace 4 are checking to check raise the turn, as opposed to something like king 10, king jack, ace 10, ace jack of spades, ace king of spades, just pure betting. I'm not gonna give that one away, but that could be a fun discussion in the comments. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll answer those. So yeah, these really strong flushes are doing a lot of checking to check raise on the turn. See, and then yeah, plenty of just naked ace high with a spade. The higher ones just checking turn, but these lower ones getting turned into a bluff. But what I was saying earlier was imposition's going to be not going to be betting super frequently here. Imposition's betting betting some those are spades. Imposition's betting some top pair, but once you get down to like this weaker top pair, we're not betting too often, and if we do, it's for a smaller size. Another thing you'll notice is that once you get up to something like Queen Jack, Queen 10, imposition's betting very frequently. This is very common on high boards blind v blind, because remember, out of position on a high turn has much more incentive to bet themselves because it's such a good card for them. So after they check, out of position is much more capped. Maybe if we look at like a rainbow queen, that might be a better demonstration. Yeah, so on a rainbow queen, well, yeah, out of position's still doing a bit of checking because they can check raise this board much more aggressively when they have something like top pair aces or something. But yeah, so on a board this dry though, generally out of position is going to be betting most of their stronger top pair. So Queen 8, Queen 10, Queen Jack, even the offsuit combos, doing quite a bit of betting. The quite a bit of betting themselves, even Ace King, King Queen. So, however, if we're in position here and we bet, and we don't get check raised by something, by something like aces or ace queen, now when we get to the river, our hand's pretty strong. So out of position's pretty capped here. Now we can just like overbet the pot with like Queen 8 here, because out of position should be betting the vast majority of their strongest top pair themselves, or check raising the like the ace queen or aces. So yeah, this is a spot where a lot of players that mid to low stakes make a huge mistake in terms of bet sizing and figuring out how strong their hand is. These trees were kind of small because the sims required so much hardware capabilities. So there's only a 50 and a 150 size for in position on the river here. But I don't think it would go this full 150 pot here, but certainly bigger than half pot. Okay, so back to the original question. So Queen of Spades, check, check, and then we get a Jack of Clubs river, I believe. And now we face an overbet. So we'll just take a look at the overbetting range. It's going to be a lot of the king queen that out of position was slow playing. Because with a king you block some draws that you want in position to call with. So those can trap occasionally, and they have an overcard. But yeah, like the low frequency queen 10 they check the turn with, or queen 8, queen 7, they're gonna mix into this line. And then yeah, it actually looks like the vast majority of the flushes are just checking to check raise. So I'm gonna let you guys pause the video for a second and think about why flushes, especially nut flushes in this line, are highly favoring checking, whereas some of the lower flushes might not be checking as often. Okay, so on the turn, we established in position is going to be relatively polar. So given that, the bluffs that imposition is going to use generally are going to have better blockers basically better equity against continues for the out of position range and trying to block value. So on a high board like this, on a high flush board, something like ace 5 or ace 6 off with the ace of spades is going to be a very, very favorable bluff. And then yeah, like these higher straight draws, especially with the spade. So if it goes check, check, and say we're out of position and we have a hand like ace 10 of spades would be a great example. I'm surprised ace 8's betting that much. Yeah, something like ace 5 of spades. So we established that as in position, we're going to be using a lot of ace of spades hands. So after it goes check, check, if you have the ace of spades in your hand, you unblock bluffs for in position. Because they would use the ace of spades to bluff on the turn. Yeah, so you want in position, like if we check, in position is just going to be bluffing a lot of low air here. So if in position has some of this low air, that's going to be a lot of the bluffs, or like 8-3, 8-4, 8-5, 8-6 that didn't bet the turn. A lot of these lower cards are going to be betting. However, again, the in position player is going to have a lot of offsuit hands on the turn. And when it's a 3 flush board, if in position has like 6-5 off or 7-6 off, well, that's a pair. But yeah, like 6-5 off with a spade, or 5-4 off. 5-4 off mostly bets flop. But if it gets to the turn and it has a spade in it, it's going to bet basically pure. So then if you have a hand like ace 5 of spades, in position would have bet the turn if they had 6-5 off, 5-4 off, you know, 5-3 off, or, you know, all those sorts of low hands with a spade. So that now you unblock those hands without a spade that get to the river that don't bet turn. So now you just doubly unblock um, the low card bluffs, and you still have an ace in your hand, which is good because you block something like ace 8 that's not going to bluff the turn because it has too much showdown, and that hand's going to check back. So just so many good removal type things going on for nut flushes here. And you know, generally on higher boards, when the out of position player checks, even in theory, it's going to be pretty condensed to ace high and total air. So you know, on the turn, they probably aren't going to bet something like 6-4 of hearts very often. So that's going to be a decent number of the bluffs that get to the river. I forget exactly where I was going with that, but yeah. So facing this 150 size, yeah. Now having a jack is like something like ace jack is quite good, because you block the improved hands that have a jack in it. But yeah, you know, if you have a queen here, I mean, out of position is, you know, mixing just naked top pair into the overbet size in theory. So, you know, if you have top pair and your opponent's repping top pair, you can't fold to one bet. So yeah, oh, I think I remember what I was going to say. Generally on higher boards, when out of position checks here, their range should be very condensed to ace high and just garbage low card air. So you know, when thinking through hands, that's pretty important to think about. Yeah, so facing the overbets, you know, something like ace 10 just doesn't really do a great job of blocking much value, because most of the king 10 type stuff is king 10, king jack is just going to bet the turn. So we don't, yeah, and like queen jack is value betting pure itself, so we don't really block any value here with something like ace 10. Yeah, okay. So go on to the next hand. So this is the 9-7 deuce 8 king board where we had ace 10 of clubs. So on the river, we faced a 75% pot bet. We can just take a look at this. So for this size, you know, just looks like a, you know, a decent 9 that wasn't betting the turn, or, you know, but an improved, basically like a middling to weak king. You know, something like king 5, king 4, king 3 get in there quite often. But those are going to be the bulk of the value hands. So, but yeah, combinatorically, queen 9 off looks like quite a big part of it. So, if you think about the turn spot on a board that's connected, you know, as far as the value a top pair would get here, you know, king 9 and ace 9 are going to bet more often than queen 9. However, since the board's connected, something like top pair with an overcard and a gutter is going to bet even more often. And then when you have 10-9, that's going to bet even more often because it has an open ender. So just so much more equity, and an overcard. So something like queen 9 is just like smack in the middle where it's like a middling to weak top pair and you don't have any redraw equity. And you have an overcard, so you don't really need protection from overcards, many overcards coming. So all that being said, oh, and also you might notice something like, 9-5 um, is betting much more often than something like Queen 9. It does have a gutter, but also it doesn't have an overcard to the board, so it needs a bit more protection. Yeah, so after it goes check check and we face that, it's going to be a lot of like low kings and then Queen 9 off. So um, yeah, so then now if you have something like King 9, well, that's not a great example, but if you have yeah, something like King Jack, King Queen, these start to be pretty good, like borderline raises. On a board this dynamic, it doesn't feel terrific, but um, since you beat a lot of the value that goes in this line, um, you generally should be raising, because his strongest King X are basically just overbetting. Like King 10 plus is largely just going for the overbet on the river. So yeah, facing the size, we had um, Ace 10 of clubs. So this was, like calling a decent amount. Um, the reason I was thinking that something like, well, I don't remember exactly what I said, but oh, right, like having an ace is good. You block something like ace king. Um, but I was just thinking like on the turn, out of position is going to bet something like king 10 a decent amount of the time. So after it goes check check, I just didn't feel like we blocked that much value. But in hindsight, um, it makes it makes more sense that a 10 could be okay, because if we face it, let's just assume out of position is bluffing. If out of position is bluffing and they bet 3/4 of the pot, they're probably not using a 10. Like if you notice something like, Queen 10, yeah, like Queen 10, I guess, would be one of the better examples, or like 10-5. These hands are disproportionately going into the big size. I mean, Queen 10 is basically always overbetting the river. So when we face 75, we really don't block bluffs uh, very heavily with a 10. Um, yeah, and we have an ace in our hand, which is quite good. So we have two unblockers to bluffs here that are both pretty decent. So yeah, and King 10 is doing a lot more like 3/4 as opposed to overbet. Um, as opposed to King Jack and King Queen, which are pure overbetting. So I guess the 10's much better than I thought it would be. Um, yeah, okay. So that's it's pretty interesting. Go on to the next round of hands. Okay, so start with this left. So 10-8, 3-3 deuce checks down to the river, and we face an overbet. Um, yeah, so I'd imagine, ooh, it's kind of a tricky one. I mean, it's certainly going to be a lot of over pairs. Um, on a low board like this, you know, something like a higher flush draw might not have too much incentive to bet. If you have something like ace 6 of hearts on the turn here, um, and you bet some medium size, you know, you're gonna fold out, um, a lot of like the naked 6 high or whatever, and then you're gonna get called by a lot of better ace high. So, well, I guess kicker doesn't play below an 8 here, but yeah, still. Um, so, I think you have something like the nut flush, you know, you'd be doing quite a bit of checking. And then I think the most prevalent value hand here is going to be something like a good 10, maybe like 10-9 plus, or like 10-9 off with a heart plus maybe. Um, like on a turn this dry, uh, in positions, you know, mostly going to be betting turn with top pair. So after it goes check check, out of position can feel quite good about a 10 here. Even an 8 maybe, just because in position can bet top pair so comfortably on a very dry board like this. So yeah, I guess now the question is, um, you know, what like do we block any value? And do we unblock bluffs? But you know, a general principle is if you face a very big bet, you know, generally the the most relevant blockers in your hand should be you should be targeting to block value, because they're going to have a much more condensed range of value. Although in this spot, you know, out of position is going to be betting quite a wide variety of top pair plus here for value. So they certainly can be bluffing all sorts of combinations here. Um, it you know it'd be much different in like a check raise double barrel offline, where out of positions made hands are going to be very condensed to a small subset of hands. Um, and so you know their bluffs are going to be very selective. Here, that is certainly not the case. Um, so a couple things going on. I mean, we certainly block some value with something like 10-8 that could take this line. 10-8 would make sense as like a turn check, uh, blocking some checkbacks with an 8, but on a board this dry, and position's going to be betting 8x as well, so I'm not too certain about that. I think it would mix still. Um, yeah, so double unblocking bluffs is going to be quite good here. We don't really, I mean, we river the occasional bottom boat here. So if I would think if we raised, it would be very polar. It would be like um, the nut flush plus, because after we get a heart river, I'm not sure you could raise like a weak 3 here. Um, and since we're betting most of our 10x on the turn, actually, I think if we get to the river with a hand like this, you know, we should probably be mixing this into the raise, into the jam range, because our raise against this overbet side is going to be very polar. So I think just double unblocking bluffs and then blocking some of the best hands out of position is going to have on the river, something like 10-8, I think is incredibly good. So I was much more favorable of a call previously, but I think given uh, what our turn check back range looks like, I think this would make a lot of sense as a jam. So I'm just gonna do that. Okay, it's a low frequency jam, but it's mostly just a call. Just because ranges are so wide in this spot that if you have a hand that double unblocks bluffs and blocks some value, you can just call. But if we like faced a turn bet and then faced a river bet, something like this, I think would be a much higher frequency jam. So we can take a look at that. So now 10-8, 3, check, check, 4 spades, check, check, 3 of diamonds. So now our job is to figure out. So first of all, he can be rubbing a hand worse than ours. Like a lot of the time, he's gonna have a lower pocket pair than this. Now we need to figure out if we can raise for value. On a board this low, I would think so. Especially when the river pairs. So given how aggressively we're going to bet something like 10x on the turn here, you know, out of position could trap some stronger hands like ace 10 or top two or over pairs, but I think mostly they're just going to be betting themselves on a board this dry. With like the strongest hands, and then if they get to the river with something like an overpair, I mean they're not going to be really blocking any strong hands. Their top of range hands would either bet very big or check to check raise. So yeah, I think this is just going to be something like, you know, pocket fives a lot. You know, even well, where I was going with the whole thing about us betting 10x very aggressively on the turn is after we check back, an 8 is quite a strong hand, so they could bet pretty much any 8 for a bigger size than this, I would think. Because we're going to have to call down a ton of ace high given how much we're going to be betting board pairs on the turn. So given all of that, I think we just have a pretty clear raise for a small size. No? Oh, no, it's just a pure call. He does it. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, 1 second. Gonna go over to the other monitor. Okay, on the left here, 10 8 3, Jack 8. So again, we sort of had this high dynamic board. A lot of the Jack X is going to be betting themselves for out of position since they, you know, have an advantage generally on these sort of higher boards. But you know, the board's wet enough where they're not going to bet very aggressively with something like an 8, or you know, put in a big bet on the turn with like a medium to weak 10. After it goes check check, it's going to be like, you know, 8x, weaker 10x, although those can block a decent bit since they still have a relative, you know, small advantage on this board. And then I mean, I would say that's the majority of the hands that get here. So I would imagine facing this overbet, it's going to be it's going to be mostly an 8, and some of the strongest Jack X. I don't think overpairs would want to slow play a ton in this line for out of position. You know, generally on wetter two-tone boards, out of position isn't going to bet flop as often. So, you know, they're generally going to be betting turn more often, on average, but especially higher turns, since their range is just going to be more condensed to high cards, since they're checking flop more. Oh, I'm sorry, I had that backwards. It's going to be more condensed to air, or something like 6-4 of diamonds or whatever. So for that exact reason, our hand just seems quite terrible to use as a bluff catch. Especially if out of position, check the turn with something like 8-4. We only block one combo of 8-4. If we were to bluff catch a hand this week, I would think we would want to double block the value here. We also don't block Jack-4, which could take this line. Yeah, so if it went check-check. Although I'm not even sure Jack-4 would take that line. I think it would mostly block turn or go smaller on the river here. So I'm just going to go with this being a pretty bad hand to use. I mean, generally out of position going to want to use hands that block our best call downs here, which would be an 8. And if we think about the 8x that we're going to show up here with most often, it's going to be like we bet ace-8, king-8 on the flop more often than the weaker 8s. It's going to be a lot of weak 8s, right? So then if he's bluffing here, if he had like 6-5 of diamonds, he double blocks 8-6, 8-5. So something like that would be a pretty good hand to use. I just think we're just blocking a lot of his best bluffs here. I'm just gonna, jeez. I mean, even ace-4 seems better than this. It's just kind of tricky because it checked down and the board paired. We're not going to have much of the board, so I'm just hesitant about pure folding a pair. Yeah, it just seems like a pretty bad one to use. Maybe something like 5s or 6s would be worse, but I don't know. Okay, it is a pure fold. Okay, now here on the right, 9-4-3, 8-8. So, yeah, I mean, out of position is going to be checking this board pretty frequently. And it's not like the 8 isn't exactly a turn where out of position is just going to be betting a ton either. So I would think that they're still going to have some overpairs or like good 9x to take this line with, and then certainly 8x. So thinking about the bluffs that are going to bet the turn most often for out of position, I mean, certainly stuff with the jack of spades, I think is gonna get in there a lot. And then the king seems like a pretty neutral card, maybe slightly good, because after the river pairs, I don't think out of position's bluffing king high here. I think it's just gonna be queen high and worse. So also, does villain have jack 8 off? Hold on. Okay, so it doesn't appear out of position has jack 8 off, so we don't really block an 8 besides king 8, which is, I mean, that's good. That's certainly a hand he could play this way quite often. But yeah, I think the jack is just quite good given, out of position is going to bet a lot of jack 10, queen 10 stuff, especially with a spade. On these lower boards, out of positions, turn bets with a spade when they have like overcards with a draw are going to be a bit better because they can, if out of position has like queen jack with the jack of spades and they hit a jack on the river, they can still value bet because the flush didn't come in. So I think the jack of spades is pretty good here. Call this most of the time. No, it's only a low frequency call. Okay, let's dig into this. Okay, so here's the turn strategy. Um, so it is true that out of position is going to bet a lot of stuff like queen jack off, jack 10 off, stuff like that. However, you know, something like jack 10 with the jack of spades is going to check to check raise pretty often, I would think. Oh no, it's actually just check calling. Okay, that makes sense because they can hit a clean jack on the river. But yeah, generally just well, it does look like jack 10. Oh no, that's in position, but yeah, out of position betting a lot of this overcard stuff. You also notice that this happens a lot where you have like offsuit king jack here, even though you don't have a gutter. You have pretty clean overcards here, and you have two blockers to offsuit like high offsuit pairs. So you know, here in position has these are low rake sims. So in position has like king, you know, a bunch of king 8 off, king 9 off, you know, jack 9 off, queen 9 off. So when you have two naked overcards on this board, your hand's stronger than it looks. That's why you'll see something like, you know, just naked king 10 of hearts betting here, or king jack off, king 10 off without a suit betting pretty often. Whereas like, you know, king 5 isn't doing this. Even ace 5 with a gutter. It just doesn't have as good of blockers to pairs. So generally, you know, I was just thinking, you know, given that I knew that information, you know, I was thinking having overcards are pretty good because you unblock the check down river bluffs. So if we I think we got overbet into. So yeah, the bluffs are a bit all over the place, but it's going to be a lot of like queen high, and then just some random like king deuce, queen deuce, king 5. Yeah. But the high cards aren't bluffing the river here. It's going to be high low hands. Um, yeah, especially something like yeah queen deuce or queen 7. Although I think in the hand we got overbet into, which is a much more condensed range. But if we face like 75, you know, something like king 10 off is going to be a pretty good call down here. Because remember, out of position isn't bluffing like double overcard hands. So yeah, and then facing this size, I mean, you pretty much never fold a pair. Besides like some of the, well, it looks like some of the 3x is folding. Yeah, like the 3x of clubs is doing a lot of folding. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. But yeah, this is a good sort of nugget of information about the turn delay here. You should probably be betting these naked overcards much more often than you currently are. So, yeah. Okay, that'll do it for this video. Please feel free to leave suggestions or general commentary in the comments. I know throughout the video I left some open-ended questions, so feel free to discuss those in the comments. I'll be sure to reply. But once again, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you next time.